least not the good. Kind. Life, he thought, had already shown him everything it could. But that was before the letter arrived. It was a cloudy Tuesday morning when the postman stopped by his small rented house. David opened the front door in his usual calm manner, wearing his faded army t-shirt. Emily, his 16-year-old daughter, was sitting at the kitchen table doing homework when she heard him say, "That's strange." He held up a thick cream-colored envelope with a red wax seal on the back. It wasn't like the usual bills or official papers he received. The name on the front was written in neat, formal handwriting, Mr. David Carter. Emily looked up. "Who even writes letters like that anymore?" she asked. David sat down and carefully opened it. Inside was a letter from a law firm he had never heard of. The words made him pause for a moment. According to the letter, a distant uncle named Charles Whitmore had passed away. David had only met him once when he was a child, and even then, he barely remembered the man. The letter explained that Charles had left behind a property in the countryside, and that property now belonged to David. It was described as an old family estate. Though the letter made it clear the place had not been occupied for decades, the lawyer's words were polite, but David could read between the lines. The house was old, neglected, and probably falling apart. Emily's eyes widened. "What do you mean we own a mansion now?" David gave a small smile. At that, it might just be a pile of bricks by now. The news spread quickly among their neighbors and a few family members. But instead of congratulations, most people reacted with disbelief or laughter. An old countryside mansion? That thing's probably ready to collapse, one neighbor said. Another smirked and commented, "Hope you've got enough money to tear it down. That's all it's good for." Even some relatives were quick to dismiss it. "Trust me, David, these old houses are nothing but trouble. They eat up money like you wouldn't believe." Emily wasn't spared from the teasing either. At school, a few classmates made fun of her. One girl posted on social media calling it the haunted dump Emily's gonna live in. Another joked about her moving in with the ghosts. David didn't let the mockery bother him. Years in the army had taught him how to ignore unhelpful opinions. He knew the only way to truly understand the situation was to see it with his own eyes. Still, part of him wondered what exactly he was walking into. He didn't know if the house had running water, electricity, or even a safe roof, he imagined. Broken windows, peeling wallpaper, and long-forgotten rooms filled with dust. That Friday, after finishing his part-time security shift, David sat down with Emily over dinner. "I've been thinking," he began. "Before we make any decisions, we're going to drive out there tomorrow, just to see it. No promises, no plans, just a look." Emily's face lit up with curiosity. "Really? We're going tomorrow? We'll take some pictures, check the condition, and talk to the lawyer again. If it's truly a disaster, we can decide what to do next. But I don't want to just throw it away without knowing." The next morning, set out in David's old but reliable SUV. The directions led them far away from the busy city streets, past quiet towns and into wide stretches of countryside. The air smelled fresher, and the sound of traffic faded into the distance. After nearly 2 hours, they turned onto a narrow road lined with tall, untrimmed hedges. "This is it," David said, glancing at the GPS. The road grew bumpier until finally, they stopped at a pair of large rusted iron gates. The gates were partly open, as if inviting them in warning them that anyone could walk right through. A weathered stone pillar stood on each side, engraved with the faint letters, "Whitmore Estate." David slowly drove in. The driveway was long, but overgrown, with grass and weeds pushing up through cracks in the pavement. Trees on either side cast heavy shadows, and thick ivy crawled up their trunks. Finally, the house came into view. It was big 3 stories tall, with tall windows and a steep tiled roof. But time had not been kind to it. The roof sagged in. Places the paint had peeled almost entirely away, and vines had climbed so far they seemed to be swallowing the walls. Emily stared in silence. "Wow, it's kind of creepy, but also kind of amazing." David parked the car and stepped out, taking a slow walk around the front. The wooden front door was scratched and weathered, but still stood firmly in its frame. The brass door handle was tarnished, and a faded welcome mat lay half buried in dust. When they stepped inside, the air was cool and heavy. Floorboards groaned under their weight, and dust swirled in the sunlight that streamed through the cracked windows. The front hall was lined with faded wallpaper and decorated with portraits of stern-looking men and women in old-fashioned clothing. It feels like walking into another century, Millie whispered. Room after room told the same story. Neglect, some had antique furniture covered with dusty white sheets. Others were nearly empty, save for the occasional broken chair or torn curtain. A large chandelier hung in the dining room, its crystal pieces dull with grime. David took mental notes about what needed repairs: new roof, new wiring, complete cleaning. It's worse than I thought, he admitted quietly, but Emily's curiosity was already pulling her further in. She wandered into the kitchen, where an old cast-iron stove still stood against one wall. That's when she noticed something unusual. In the far corner, partly hidden behind a wooden cabinet, was a small square door in the floor. She knelt and brushed away the dust. It was a trapdoor, secured with a heavy, rusted latch. She tried to lift it, but it didn't budge. "Dad," I called out. David walked in, frowning at the sight. "That's interesting," he said. He gave the latch a firm tug, but it held tight. The lock was older than most of the furniture in the room. "What do you think's down there?" Emily asked. David smiled faintly. "Only one way to find out, but not today. We need proper tools, and I'd rather not break my back trying to open it now." They agreed they would come back the next day with a crowbar and flashlights. As they left the mansion, David locked the front door again, feeling the weight of possibility in his chest. He didn't know what that trapdoor led to, but he couldn't shake the thought that maybe, just maybe, the old mansion wasn't as worthless as everyone said. Replaying in his mind all night, Emily came down to breakfast, still rubbing her eyes. "Did you sleep at all?" she asked, pouring milk into her cereal. "Not much," David admitted. "I kept thinking about what's under that floor. Could be nothing, but I just have a feeling." Lee grinned. "So maybe it's a secret passage, or maybe gold bars, maybe a whole underground mansion." David laughed quietly. "Let's not get carried away. But whatever it is, we're going to find out today." After breakfast, they gathered what they needed: a sturdy crowbar, flashlight each, gloves, and a small tool bag David kept from his army days. Emily also brought her phone, ready to record everything in case it's cool enough for the internet. As she put it, by the time they reached the mansion, the morning sun had cut through most of the fog. The long driveway looked less intimidating in daylight, though the tall trees still leaned over as if guarding the place. When they stepped inside, the smell of dust and age was the same as yesterday. David headed straight for the kitchen, Emily. Right behind him, the trapdoor seemed even smaller than he remembered, but the latch was stubborn and heavy. He crouched down, slid the crowbar under the edge, and pushed with steady force. The rusty metal groaned, and then finally gave way with a loud snap. "Got it," David said, pulling the latch free. He gripped the handle built into the wood and pulled upward. The trapdoor opened slowly, revealing a square opening about 3 feet wide. A narrow wooden staircase led down into shadow. Emily leaned forward and peered in. "That is dark. Really dark." David switched on his flashlight and shone it down. The light beam showed the bottom of the stairs and part of a stone wall. Dust particles floated in the air like tiny snowflakes. "Stay close," he told Emily as he started down. The wooden steps creaked under his boots. Emily followed carefully, holding onto the wall with one hand while clutching her flashlight with the other. When they reached the bottom, the first thing David noticed was the change in temperature. It was much cooler here, almost like stepping into a cave. The air smelled faintly of damp stone and something else like oil, lamps, or old metal. They found themselves in a small basement room with stone walls and a low ceiling. Against one wall were wooden shelves holding jars, dusty bottles, and small boxes. But the most curious sight was the far wall. A large wooden door, much taller and wider than a normal basement door, reinforced with iron bands. "Wow," Emily whispered. "That's kind of creepy." David approached the door and tested the handle, turned easily, and the door opened with a deep groan. Beyond it was a tunnel made of old bricks leading into darkness. The ceiling was arched, and the floor was covered with a thin layer of dirt. "Looks like this was more than just a basement," David said. They walked slowly, their flashlights cutting through the shadows. The tunnel led to another room, this one larger, with walls lined in shelves and cabinets. Some of the shelves were empty, but others held objects wrapped in cloth. Emily carefully unwrapped one bundle and gasped. Inside was an old brass candlestick, ornate and heavy. Another package contained a silver serving tray with intricate engravings. "Dad, these look expensive," she said. David nodded but kept his thoughts to himself. He had seen enough old antiques to know that sometimes they were worth money, and sometimes they were just pretty objects from another time. On the far side of the room, they spotted something even more unusual. Several large wooden crates stacked together. The wood was dark with age. David noticed a faint logo burned into the side of a circle with the letters WCS inside. Emily traced the letters with her fingers. "What do you think that means? No idea?" David replied. "Could be a shipping company, could be initials of someone's name. Let's see what's inside." He knelt by one crate, pried it open with the crowbar, and pulled the lid away. Inside were layers of straw, and beneath that more objects wrapped in cloth. He carefully pulled one out and unwrapped it. Inside was an old painting in a wooden frame, its colors still surprisingly vivid. Emily shone her flashlight on it. "Looks like it belongs in a museum." David glanced at the signature in the corner but didn't recognize it. Still, the quality was clear. He wrapped it back up and placed it carefully aside. They moved to the next crate, but before opening it, Emily noticed something else. A tall metal cabinet in the corner of the room, its door slightly ajar. "What's that?" she asked. David walked over and pulled the door open. Inside were stacks of folders, yellowed papers, and photographs. At the bottom sat a small leather pouch, tied with a thin cord. Emily's curiosity got the better of her. "Open it." Untied the cord and tipped the pouch gently into his hand. Out slid several coins, thick, heavy, and clearly made of gold. Each one had a date stamped on it from more than 100 years ago. Emily's mouth dropped open. "Dad, are those real?" "They look real," David said quietly, his heart beating faster. He had handled gold coins before, and these felt genuine. They both stood there for a moment, staring at what they had found. The dusty basement, the crates, the coins, it was all so unexpected. The mocking voices of neighbors and relatives seemed far away now. Emily broke the silence. "Do you think Uncle Charles knew about this? Or maybe he left it for us on purpose?" David didn't answer right away. He was already thinking of the possibilities. One thing was certain. This old mansion was hiding stories no one had told in a long time. As they began to carry a few of the smaller items upstairs, David felt a change inside him. Yesterday, the house had felt like a burden. Today, it felt like a mystery worth solving. Silverware, the documents. They all hinted at something bigger. Emily was just as eager. She had been texting her best friend all night about the hidden room, although she avoided mentioning the gold. She knew her father wouldn't want too many people knowing about that yet. "Ready?" David asked over breakfast. Emily nodded quickly. "I barely slept. I kept thinking, what if there's another hidden door, or maybe even more tunnels?" David smiled faintly. "One step at a time. We need to check everything carefully. And this time, we're going to take pictures of every item before moving it." By mid-morning, they were back at the mansion. The sun was shining, but the house still had a quiet, heavy atmosphere as if it was holding its breath, waiting for them. They went straight to the kitchen and lifted the trapdoor again. Down in the basement, the cool air wrapped around them. Dust still floated in their flashlight beams, but now the space felt less like a creepy secret and more like a place. they were slowly claiming as their own. They began with the crates they hadn't opened yet. The second crate contained more paintings, landscapes, portraits, and one that seemed to depict a grand ballroom filled with people in elegant clothes. The colors were rich, and Emily couldn't stop staring. "These are amazing," she whispered. David agreed. He carefully set them aside, making a mental note to look up the artist's name later. The third crate held something entirely different: books. Leather-bound volumes with gold lettering on the spines. Some were history books. Others were journals. Emily picked one up and flipped through the pages. "Look at this," she said. "It's a diary." "Ah!" From 1942. David took it from her and read a few lines aloud. The handwriting was neat, describing everyday events mixed with small notes about deliveries and storage arrangements. The language was polite, but vague almost, as if the writer had been careful not to say too much. They set the books aside for later and moved on to the large metal cabinet they had only partially explored yesterday. Behind the folders and papers they had already seen, David found more envelopes tied with ribbon. Some contained old black and white photograph soldiers posing together. Trains loaded with crates, and even a few images of what looked like large estates. Emily leaned closer. "Dad, some of these look just like this house." David studied the photos. She was right. One image showed the front of the Whitmore estate, but with far fewer vines and a well-kept lawn. Another showed the same long driveway, but with a horse-drawn carriage instead of a car at the very bottom of the cabinet. Hidden behind a loose panel, they discovered another leather pouch. Inside were several military medals, each engraved with dates and names. David recognized the style. They were from World War II. These aren't just family keepsakes," he said softly. "They're part of history." Emily's eyes were wide. "Do you think Uncle Charles was in the war?" "It's possible," David said. "Or maybe he was connected to someone who was. Either way, I think he wanted these things kept safe." They spent hours cataloging what they found, taking photographs, and writing short descriptions. As they worked, David noticed something about the basement structure. One wall near the far end of the tunnel didn't look quite right. The bricks were a slightly different color, and the mortar looked newer than the rest. He tapped it gently with the crowbar. The sound was hollow. Emily noticed his expression. "What is it?" "I think this wall might be hiding something," he replied. With careful effort, David chipped away at the mortar between two bricks. The more he worked, the more convinced he became that the wall wasn't original. After about half an hour, he had loosened enough bricks to create a small opening. He'd shone his flashlight through. His heart skipped a beat. Beyond the wall was another room. It was smaller than the first basement room, with only one low-hanging light bulb dangling from the ceiling. Dust covered everything, but the space was surprisingly well organized. Along one wall stood a row of wooden chests, each locked with a metal latch. Against the other wall were more shelves, this time filled with what looked like carefully wrapped parcels. David climbed through the opening, Emily following closely. She walked slowly, her flashlight sweeping across the chests. "Should we open one?" she asked. David nodded and pulled at the latch of the nearest chest. It clicked open easily. Inside was a neatly folded old military flag, and underneath it, more gold coins, this time mixed with silver bars wrapped in cloth. Emily gasped. "Oh my, Dad, this is huge." David closed the chest gently. "This is more than I expected. These things are valuable, yes, but they're also pieces of history. Whoever collected them had a reason. They didn't open all the chests right away. Instead, they decided to document everything first, just as they had planned." Emily took photos from different angles while David carefully noted each chest and its position. By the time they finished, it was late afternoon. They sat on the basement steps, tired but filled with a strange energy, you know? Emily said, "Yesterday everyone thought this house was just an old wreck. But this changes everything." David nodded. "It does, but we have to. Be smart about it. We can't just tell the world what we've found, not yet. We need to understand why these things are here and what they mean." Emily smiled. "I'm just glad we didn't listen to the people who laughed at us." David looked around the dimly lit basement one more time. He had a strong feeling they were only at the beginning of uncovering the mansion's true story. Door, as if it was silently calling him back. Emily came in a few minutes later, her hair still messy from sleep. "You're thinking about it again, aren't you?" she asked with a knowing smile. David chuckled. "Guilty. I keep wondering who put all that in the basement and why." They decided it was time to dig deeper, not just into the crates and chests, but into the history of the house itself. Before heading down, David called the lawyer who had handled the inheritance. The man was surprised by the call. "I'll be honest with you, Mr. Carter," the lawyer said over the phone. "Your Uncle Charles was a very private man. He rarely spoke of his past and almost never let anyone into that house. There are no official records of the basement you're describing. If there's something valuable there, he probably meant it to stay in the family." That last sentence made David pause. Stay in the family. It sounded deliberate, like his uncle had planned this. Armed with that thought, he and Emily descended into the basement once more. This time, David brought a notebook, determined to record every detail. They began opening the wooden chests they had left untouched the day before. The second chest was filled with more silver bars, each wrapped in thick paper with handwritten notes in the margins, dates, locations, and names of places they didn't recognize. The third chest held military uniforms, neatly folded, with insignia that David recognized as British and American. Beneath the uniforms were small wooden boxes, each containing medals. Some were engraved with names, while others bore symbols David had only seen in history books. Emily's eyes widened as she held one up. "These look like they belong in a museum." "They probably do," David replied. "But right now, they're in our basement, which means we need to take responsibility for them." In one of the smaller shelves, they discovered a thick, leather-bound folder. Inside were typed reports, stamped with confidential and faded red ink. The reports described something called Operation Ashford, a post-war effort to recover valuables that had been abandoned or stolen during World War II. "David, read aloud a passage that made them both stop. Recovered items shall be stored at Whitmore Estate until further notice. Primary custodian, Charles Whitmore." Emily's mouth fell open. "Dad, that's this house." Uncle Charles was the custodian. That means he was in charge of keeping these things safe. David felt a chill. It all began to make sense. Paintings, the coins, the silver, the medals. These weren't just family treasures. They were part of a much larger story, hidden away for decades. As they pieced together the clues, they realized their uncle must have been part of a trusted group tasked with safeguarding valuable artifacts after the war. But for some reason, the items had never been returned to their countries of origin or placed in museums. "Do you think he meant to keep them?" Emily asked quietly. David thought about it for a long moment. "I don't know. Maybe he was told to wait and then the instructions never came. Or maybe he didn't trust that they'd be cared for properly. Either way, he kept them hidden." They worked through the rest of the morning, carefully photographing and labeling each item. Emily created a digital folder on her laptop, organizing the images so they could be easily referenced later, just when they thought they'd seen it all. David found something wedged between the wall and one of the cabinets, a narrow wooden box, about 2 feet long. He slid it out and opened it to find a set of rolled-up maps. Unrolling the first one, they saw detailed diagrams of the estate grounds, including areas they hadn't explored yet. One map even showed a second, smaller building marked as storage. Emily pointed at it. "We didn't see that yesterday, did we?" David shook his head. "No, it might be hidden under overgrowth. We'll check it later." After lunch, they went outside to search. Using the map as a guide, they made their way through thick grass and wild plants until they reached what looked like a collapsed shed. Most of the roof had caved in, and ivy covered the walls. But inside, they found several heavy trunks stacked. Together, the trunks were locked, but the old keys they had found in the basement worked perfectly. Inside, they discovered even more antique ornate clocks, crystal glassware, and a stack of newspapers from the 1940s. Emily picked one up, reading the front page aloud. Peace declared. War officially ends. She glanced at her father. It's like walking through a time machine. David felt a deep respect for his uncle. Whatever his reasons, Charles Whitmore had managed to protect these items for decades without anyone finding out as they carried a few small things back. To the main house, David thought about what to do next. Part of him wanted to call a historian or museum immediately. Another part wanted to honor his uncle's silence until they fully understood everything. That evening, he sat in the front room of the mansion, surrounded by some of the items they had brought upstairs. The gold coins glinted softly in the lamplight, and the old paintings seemed almost alive in their frames. You know, Emily said, I don't feel embarrassed anymore about this house. I feel proud. David smiled. Me too. And I think Uncle Charles would be glad to see us taking care of it. He knew the coming days would bring difficult choices, how much to reveal, who to trust, and what to keep. But for the first time, since inheriting the mansion, he didn't see it as a burden, saw it as a legacy worth protecting. And the old mansion waited in a calm silence, like a stage before the curtain opened. David poured coffee and stared out the window at the long drive, thinking about the road that had led them here. The letter, the jokes, the dust, the first glint of a gold coin under a shaking flashlight. Are you ready? He asked quietly. Emily nodded. Yes, let's tell the truth. All of it. It began with careful steps. David called a historian at the local university. Someone who had written about the area's role in World War II. He didn't mention the gold at first. He spoke about the documents, the uniforms, the maps, and the folder marked Operation Ashford. The historian's voice sharpened with interest. I can come today, she said. Please don't move anything else until I arrive. Next, David contacted the lawyer again and asked for advice on legal reporting. The lawyer recommended notifying the Cultural Heritage Office and a museum curator. If your uncle was named custodian, the lawyer said, there may be records that explain how the items should be handled. Could be returning something long missing. This is important work, Mr. Carter. By mid-morning, the historian, a museum curator, and two representatives from the Heritage Office stood in the kitchen, blinking at the trapdoor as if it were a portal to another time. David led them down slowly, step by step, his heart steady but full. Emily followed, holding a neat folder of photographs and notes she had organized on her laptop. They moved from shelf to shelf in the cool basement air. The historian whispered as she read labels, dates, and handwritten notes. The curator gently lifted cloth from a painting, studied the brushwork, and breathed. This is significant. The heritage officers examined the medals, the silver, and the records with careful hands. No one rushed. No one joked. There was only respect. When they reached the second hidden room beyond the false wall, the group grew silent. The chests, the bars of silver, the rolled maps, the uniforms, everything was recorded, photographed, and described. The heritage officers explained the process. A formal inventory, a legal review of ownership, and research into where each item came from. Some would likely belong in national collections. Some might be connected to estates or museums overseas. Some might be family pieces after all. The goal, one officer said gently, is to honor history and to do right by everyone involved. David felt relief rather than loss. He had never wanted to keep treasure. He wanted clarity, wanted to choose the honest path and show his daughter what integrity looks like in the real world. This is bigger than us, he said to Emily. Later, when the experts had gone upstairs to write their first reports at the dining table, and that's okay, can still be part of the story. News didn't leak right away because the team asked for privacy while they verified documents. But small towns have quick ears, and soon there were curious glances at the gate and quiet knocks at the front door. David stayed polite and firm. We'll share everything once the facts are clear, he told neighbors. Please give us time. A week later, the first official statement was ready. The historian stood in the front hall beside David and Emily, with the lawyer and the heritage officers nearby. They explained that many items were part of a post-war safeguarding effort. Uncle Charles had been a custodian named in the records of Operation Ashford. The operation's chain of instructions had broken somewhere in the past, and the items had remained at Whitmore Estate, preserved but hidden. Now they would be inventoried, traced to their origins, and placed where they belonged to museums, archives, family estates, or national collections. The statement thanked the Carter family for coming forward and praised their care. The story spread quickly from local websites to regional news and then national outlets. Headlines carried their names, but David made sure every interview focused on Uncle Charles and the historical effort, not on gold or value. "This is about responsibility," he said into microphones, calm and steady. "It's about finishing a promise." People who had mocked them before showed up with soft voices and awkward smiles. The neighbor who joked about tearing the house down brought fresh bread and apologized. "I spoke too fast," he said, eyes lowered. "I didn't know." David accepted the bread with quiet grace. Emily, who had once read unkind comments about a haunted dump, received messages from classmates who now asked, "Can we help?" She answered with a simple, kind yes. Help came in all shapes. A retired electrician volunteered to assess the wiring for free. A roofer offered a discount to repair the sagging tiles. A local garden club arrived with gloves and clippers to clear the front path and cut back the ivy. The mansion began to breathe again. Sunlight found the floors. Fresh air threaded through open windows. On weekends, the historian held small talks in the front room, explaining what they had learned about the operation, the time, and the lives connected to each artifact. As the inventory continued, the team identified several paintings of confirmed historical value. After legal review, 2 were loaned to a national museum, with the Whitmore estate listed on the plaque as the custodian of record. The museum invited David and Emily to the quiet unveiling before the doors opened to the public. Standing together in front of the paintings, they heard a curator say, "Without your honesty, we might never have completed this part of the story." Emily felt a warm pride rise in her chest. She squeezed her father's hand. Not every item left the house. Some were clearly Family Thinks letters in Uncle Charles's handwriting, personal photographs, the estate maps, and a diary that mentioned Emily's great-grandmother teaching children to read on the back steps one summer. Those stayed. The Heritage Office helped David create a small family room in the mansion's library, proper acid-free boxes and temperature advice, so the memories would last. There were practical choices, too. A portion of the items that could legally be sold duplicates of common silver pieces and a few antiques without. Unique historical ties went to auction with the guidance of the museum's ethics team. David used part of the proceeds to fund the house repairs and set up a modest scholarship at the local school for students who loved history and wanted to study it. He named it the Whitmore Carter Scholarship. Emily helped choose the first recipients, reading essays at the same kitchen, the table where they had first stared down at the trapdoor. Life for Emily changed at school. She was no longer the girl with the haunted dump. She was the student who asked curious questions in history, class and who gave a short talk in the auditorium about doing careful research and letting the truth be bigger than your pride. She spoke slowly, clearly, grateful for simple words. That fit what she had learned. When she finished, the students clapped, not loudly or wildly, but warmly. It felt like respect. It felt real. As months passed, the mansion found its purpose. The downstairs rooms were restored with carefresh paint close to the original color. Polished wood, repaired windows that still looked old from the outside but worked smoothly from the inside. David left one small basement space open to visitors. On certain days, guided by the heritage team, the short panel explaining Operation Ashford, Uncle Charles's role, and the Carter family's decision to come forward. There was no drama, just steady light, clear labels, and a simple message about stewardship. Odd. On the first open day, the line of visitors curled along the drive, and children held their parents' hands. Older neighbors leaned on canes. A bus from the school let students step out in neat rows. The historian smiled as she greeted guests, and David stood near the door, nodding to familiar faces and new ones. Emily walked with a small group of younger kids, answering questions and pointing out details she had helped write. When someone asked, "Were you scared the first time you went down there?" laughed softly a little. But curiosity was louder than fear. In the afternoon, a shy woman approached David with a folder of old documents. "My grandfather worked on the railway after the war," she said. "Wrote about delivering crates to a big house with tall trees. We never knew where he meant." The historian compared the notes in the folder to the operation records and smiled with quiet excitement. Another loose thread had found its place in the tapestry. Later, after the last visitors had gone, David and Emily stood under the evening sky at the edge of the garden. The house behind them glowed gently from the windows. The work was not finished. History never really is, but the hard part, the lonely part, was over. The mansion was not a joke anymore. It was a place of learning, care, and memory. "I'm proud of you," David said, his voice low. "I'm proud of you too," Emily replied. "You didn't hide. You didn't rush. You did the right thing." He nodded. "We did it together." We walked the path back to the front steps. The same steps where they had first felt the sting of other people's laughter and the weight of doubt. Now those steps felt solid under their feet. Before going inside, Emily turned and looked across the grounds one more time. The trees were taller than her worries now, as the wind carried the soft sounds of the countryside. Somewhere a night bird called, "What do you think Uncle Charles would say?" she asked. David smiled. "I hope he'd th.